Hopefully this is working. Sorry about the delay for anybody that was waiting on us. Had a few little hiccups on the technical side of things, as per usual. But thank you for sticking around and being patient for us. And if someone can just let me know in the chat to make sure this is working, we'll get things started. Lots of stuff to do today. Lots and lots of stuff. It's been an exciting week. What is going on, JD? Intelligent Machine, looks like you're in the house. Hope everybody can hear me okay. Streaming to you live from Portland, Maine today as the fellows get ready for the big Sleep Tight release, which is in 2 days, I believe. I believe it's Thursday. So they got their hands full, and we're going to do some texture stuff, is the plan. Thank you for confirming for me, JD. Joshua in the house. What's going on, buddy? So the plan today is, hopefully you guys have all seen that we've released all the kits with textures, which we are super duper excited about, and cannot wait to see what you guys do with them. It was kind of a massive undertaking to get them all done and updated and up to the quality that I think our latest kits are at. But we're really excited, especially because I think it makes it that much easier to get in and start creating, especially for big scenes. You don't have to worry about finding the right texture and setting up a million billion things. Couple clicks and we should be good to go. So the plan today is we're going to kind of take a look at one scene in 3ds Max, just kind of go over the basics of getting everything set up and linked, for anybody that might be a little bit confused by that. And then I'm going to go over some tips and tricks about how I like to set up my scenes and deal with my scenes, for shading materials and everything else. So hopefully there's some good stuff in there, and we are going to probably hop right to. So let's see here. Booyah. I think you guys should be able to see my screen now. And if at any point I skip something or you guys have questions, just hit me up in the chat. I will try my best to pay attention as I'm going through things. And I'll definitely circle back around for any questions. Alrighty, so I've just opened the industrial kit, which kind of has a medium number of maps that we're going to quickly look at. And as just kind of a starting point, if you're using Max or Maya, it's probably best to start with the Max or the Maya file in the archive. If you are working in Modo or Cinema 4D or Blender, FBX tends to do a better job of importing. That's not always the case, but I would start with FBX and then OBJ. Either way, once you get everything imported into the scene, you're probably going to get some kind of warning about some missing files, which will be one of the first things we deal with. And you'll get everything in here just white with kind of standard materials. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to relink all of the textures. So currently this just has all the materials in the scene right now. What's going on, Donda? Good to see you here. And Arthur's here. Alrighty. Glad to see you guys here. All right. So yeah. So if we get all of our scene materials, we can see that it just has everything has a standard material applied, and we have all of these missing bitmaps for each of the materials, and they all kind of vary anywhere from 1 to 3 maps depending on what the material is and what we needed. So the kind of plain Jane way to go about reconnecting things. Thank you, Donda. For those of you that don't know, I was blessed with a little baby girl about a week and a half ago. Baby is healthy, mom is healthy. We're settling into parenthood, and it's very exciting. But yeah, thank you. Thank you. Okay, so you should see everything should have a material, and the names of the materials should be something that relates to the map. So for this one, we have Bricks Old, And we can see that we have a bricks old diffuse map, bricks old rough map, and a bricks old normal map. The very simple way to go through and relink them is kind of the manual way, right? You find your file, click on the map, and all we need to do is grab bricks old diffuse, drag it in. We can see that that map pops up. For a scene like this, you could go through and pretty easily just manually connect them all. However, there are better and faster ways to do it. And for this scene, we'd only have to connect, 8 or so maps. For some of the scenes, you'd be looking at, I think, 20 or 30 scenes bitmaps to connect, which is a hassle and not any fun. And then if you move the maps, you have to do it again. So if you are using 3ds Max, I will pull up the script. Collins Center has an amazing little script that just does it all for you. If you are not using Max, then maybe we should get something going on the Discord. There are similar plugins and scripts for basically every software known to man. I don't know them since I'm a Max user, but hopefully we can get all of those up there for each software so that people don't have to go through and connect these manually, because it will become a hassle for, I think Neo Tokyo has like 30 some odd maps. Not any fun to reconnect. So if I open relink bitmaps, you can see that it's telling me which maps are still missing, and it's asking me to browse, and I can go ahead and browse to the folder where everything is. And basically hit relink, and it will go through and search through subfolders, and you can see that all the maps are updating. And it's that quick regardless of how many maps you have, basically. You can use the asset tracker. If you don't know exactly where you stashed the maps, it's a little bit more of a hassle. If you're using Max, I highly recommend Center Script. It's super simple, especially if you're trying to relink big scenes, where you've grabbed maps from random folders and all that kind of stuff, and then you move one thing or you change a drive letter, and it will go through and find things. It's awesome. And it's free. I do recommend throwing the guy a couple of bucks. It's, donate if you'd like to. It's such a time saver. If you're not using it, you can thank me later because it's awesome. Okay, so once we got all of those relinked, we can see that we still don't have any actual materials here. I'm in FStorm, and FStorm doesn't do anything with standard materials. So right now, if we hit render, which we'll do really quickly, let's just make sure we're not looking at too big of a scene. We're not. Everything's still going to come up white, which is kind of what we expect, just because there are no actual materials in the scene yet. And so this is kind of the next step that we need to go through, which is setting up some kind of shaders. And it's going to vary based off of which software you're using and which rendering engine you're using. But basically all of them have either built into them or available as a script on the forums and the like converter files. And the reason that we're giving everybody just standard materials, which no one really uses, is that everybody, every converter will deal with the standard material. And then setting up the shaders is pretty quick after that. So in FStorm, it's built directly into the actual render engine. And so I'm just going to say convert scene to FStorm. And if we open up our material editor again, you can see these are no longer active. And are these the standard ones? Standard. And now these are actual FStorm materials. And these are the standards that aren't being used anymore. Delete those. So there's a couple things that we're going to have to do really quickly. If we hit render right now, it's going to be a bit of a mess, but we should have all of the maps plugged into the right place, more or less. So the only things that I'm really going to go through and change really quick is if this if I only have like a roughness map, I'm going to plug that into both the reflection map and the reflection glossy map. We can adjust it again later, but as a starting point, just plugging any black and white roughness map into both usually does a great job. Looks like we got some people posting some other methods for linking textures. I'm super excited to see that, guys. Yeah, it's such a hassle to do, and there's usually a couple click solution. So thank you guys for all of that, Joshua, JD, Joel, very much appreciate it. So we're gonna go through and just do some like very quick basic settings, which are gonna vary a little bit based off of what render engine you're using, but everyone should have an idea of kind of where they like to put a bump map, that kind of thing. So I'm just gonna very quickly change the bump value to like 1/8 of an inch. We're gonna turn on all the maps. I'm gonna connect this to the reflection map again. I could write a script for this, and maybe I will at some point. But the one thing to note is that if you have a normal map, and you're not used to using normal maps, most softwares require you to tell the render engine that it is a normal map. In FStorm, it's just sorry about that. In FStorm, it is just a little tick button in the bitmap shader. In V-Ray, you actually plug it into a bitmap, a normal map. What would you call it? Map editor? I'm not really sure. It's this guy, V-Ray. Well, maybe they got rid of it. Either way, you have to let it know that it is a normal map, and normal maps can be way, way more powerful, or you can push them much, much harder than you can a bump map, which is kind of why I like them. So alrighty, done. I'll set this up to like 80, and that's basically all we're gonna do. For the metal, I know I want it to be like a blackish metal, so I'm gonna set it to just a few points over black. For the diffuse color, and at like a glance, these look all right. So without any real editing to the materials, let's see what we got. So without doing anything besides just plugging in the maps to kind of their relevant slots, we should get a pretty decent solution here. And so that's what we're working with at kind of a very, very base level. Should probably make some kind of glass material really quickly. Let's find where that guy is. And since these are just single panes of glass, I'm just going to make them reflective and call that done for now, because I don't want to see inside of anything. And we'll make it a little bit more reflective than that. Okay, so that is kind of the bare bones, get it done as quickly as possible relinking process, at least for Max. And if you're not talking through it, that takes, for a scene like this, where it's not too many materials, just a couple of minutes. JD, you are way ahead of me, my friend. So there's a couple of things that JD's guessing at that I'm going to do right now, which is I do for pretty much all of my scenes. And kind of for all of the previews that you've seen of the textured kits, they all have a couple of things thrown into the shader that are super easy, super quick to do, and add just quite a bit of realism into your scene. So I am going to save this, and we'll just say 01 basic. Excuse me. Just so that we can compare it at the end after we do a few more tricks to this guy. And another point to make is that whenever I get a new kit, this is kind of the first thing I do, and I do it just in the kit as a whole. So right now we have everything in here. Right now there's just one brick material on everything. I try and I put in just kind of a normal HDRI, light the whole scene. If we pull out of this really quickly, you can see that we've already adjusted everything. Wowza, somebody messed up some tone mapping. There we go. That looks a little bit better. So this way you can make just broad adjustments and get all the materials into a place where you more or less like them. And then every time you use the kit, you're already at that base starting point. So usually I do obviously the relinking stuff, and then I do a couple of tweaks just so that if it's a background building or anything like that, I don't even need to touch it when I drop it into a scene. So a couple of things that we can do. First thing we'll do is we'll start working on we'll add a little bit of dirt, and we're going to add a little bit of dirt almost everywhere. So first, if we go to our bricks, here we go. And again, this is going to be a little bit different. How you add these in is going to be a little bit different for every render engine, but hopefully you guys are at least a little bit familiar with dirt maps and the like. The way that I'm going to do it in FStorm is first I'm going to plug it into a mix map, and I'm going to set this to multiply once it's ready to go. And then just the black parts or the dirt is going to multiply and darken the bricks over top of everything else. But first, if it's set to normal, it's going to go white and black. And so now we just have like a little bit of like an ambient occlusion shader kind of going on, which is not what we are going to go for. But it's easier, I find at least, it's easier to adjust the dirt map when you're not confused by the actual texture that's going to go over top of. So I am going to make this pretty big. I'm going to go like 3 feet or so, or a meter, for the metric folk. And I'm going to change it so that it's basically only looking at surfaces that are coming down. And so you can see we have a lot of dirt coming down from these top parts. The little bits you see here is a result of the normal map, but we don't have it going upwards. So you don't see any dirt really here. You see quite a bit of dirt coming down, and you should see it more or less at the corners as well. So we're going to do that really quickly, and then we're going to set that to multiply. And setting that to multiply, we can see if we look at it here, it's darkening the top part, but letting the texture read through, and we're not going to go 100% because nothing is ever black. So we're going to do something like that. We're going to do the same thing for the concrete, and that'll be nice and quick. In V-Ray, you don't need to use a mix map. You can have this go straight into the dirt shader. One less step. There are pros and cons, I suppose. And we're going to do the same exact thing. We're going to do about 3 feet. Usually I experiment a bit with that, but having just gone through and shaded all of these, I know that somewhere around 3 feet looks pretty good. We're going to do the same thing, set that to multiply. And the other thing we're going to do, first we'll do it with the metal. So if we zoom in on this staircase up here, and we look at that, we're going to see, because we are trying to keep poly count as efficient as possible, for things like the mullions around windows and all that sort of thing, we're not chamfering the edges. Generally speaking, you're going to multiply your poly count by like 3 or 4, which if we were to chamfer everything, these kits would be up in the 20 million range. So as opposed to that, these are modeled with hard edges, which look very game-like. And so first thing, let's just kind of work on this metal shader really quickly. I think it can be not quite as rough. And so get it so we can see what we're looking at. And I'm going to make it a little bit shinier just by dropping the opacity of the glossiness map. And I'm also going to turn down the reflection map. I'm going to basically tone down everything because I think it looked just a little bit harsh there. I want it to be just a little bit smoother. I think the bump can come down a little bit as well. I think that's starting to get somewhere for like a good metally type of texture. And then in pretty much every rendering software now, we have rounded edges, which if you kind of watch both the edges of the mullions, which are metal in this model, and also the edges of, what's going on, Forrest? Good to see you, my friend. If you watch the edges of all the metal, we can just go ahead and pop on, we'll kind of overdo it a little bit with like a 1/2 inch. We can see now we pick up all of these highlights. That's a little bit soft probably for metal. Usually they're a harder edge, but depending on how close you're going to be, the further away you go, the more I tend to exaggerate it because that little glint really sells the realism. I find. Let's turn down the bump on that concrete. So again, if you look at this part of the metal really quickly, if we turn that guy off, it's going to very quickly turn game-like. It becomes all very flat. You don't read any of those edges. And then just by putting on, something like a 1/4 inch or a 1/2 inch bevel, you start to get all of these little highlights everywhere, which, the name of the game. We can do the same for the concrete. You can see these very, very hard corners. Concrete in the real world is going to have heavier corners than metal will. And so we can go through and start softening that up. And actually, I think... Dun, 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 that's not it. You can really exaggerate this if you want to. You could go up to like 12 inches, and if you're going, you can see that just like smooth this entire corner for this huge smokestack. And that really depends. Sometimes you can break it into 2 materials depending on how close or how far you're going to be. You can see this looks pretty cool now, but this we've kind of lost all of the detail and it looks a little smudged. So we're going to go somewhere in between it. Still pretty drastic, but you can see how that sharpens these edges back up and still leaves us with a pretty soft corner on these. So let's see, we've done dirt, we've done rounded edges. I do that for pretty much everything. And then for any of these older kits, like, or not older, but like more decrepit or not shiny, glossy buildings, one of the things that I really, really like to do for the glass, especially for glass that we're not going to see through, we can throw a dirt map on there, which is not what I'm going to do. What I'm going to do is, let's find the glass. I am going to use a random color generator. And I'm going to plug it into the diffuse map at first just so we can see what it is. And if you're using Max and a different render engine, you could use Forest Color. If you have Forest Pro, V-Ray I think has a multi-texture material. And I'm not sure what they are on the other softwares. Wish I did, but there should be something that'll generate just basically random materials. And if we look at it right now, it's not doing really anything because it's set to vary by object. And what we wanted to do is to vary basically by sub-element, which is like groups of polygons. So if we go to element ID, and I think we need to turn this on. Yes, we do. So that's what it's generating. Because these are all separate polygons of planes of glass, it's going to give a different value, and you can control that however you want, all the way throughout. And so if we take that out of the diffuse now, and we plug that into, we're going to first plug it into reflection. And even just dropping it in there, we drop that into both of these really quickly, and that needs to get turned way down. Not that far down. We start to get just enough variation that this looks like old glass that got replaced randomly and everything else. And you can really crank that up if you want to, depending on kind of the look you're going for. But that at a distance to me sells the look of old pane glass in a factory. And the beautiful part is that that's going to be everywhere. Let's see here. Just organizing the screen. Where's one of those big, beautiful walls of windows? So there, I think we can actually turn it up a little bit more. And this is one of those things that I generally do. I have something sitting in there to begin with. And then as I set up an actual scene, I will tweak it for the actual scene that I'm working on. But for this view, which is kind of with the sun right behind us, we can actually crank it up quite a bit more. And we can drop it also into the diffuse texture. And then just tone it way, way down. JD, so for F-Storm, it's called F-Storm Random Color. And that's only an F-Storm specifically as I'm working on. If you're using 3ds Max and you have i2's Forest Pro, Forest Pro's, what is that one called? Forest Color, I believe is the name of that map. Which will work with V-Ray, and I believe it works with Octane. You can use these down here to adjust how much it's adjusting, and then you can adjust whether it's varying by object, so like every mesh, or by every element, which will be anything that's like a group of polygons. For the other softwares, I sadly cannot answer that question for you, but there is definitely something in any render engine that you guys are using. And yeah, if you guys know what it is in your relevant softwares, definitely throw it in the chat there or throw it on the Discord. So I'm sure people are interested. But it's one of those things, we're going to use it for a few different techniques here, because especially if you're building a big, huge world, that variation is what's going to sell it. Right, so like if we kind of like, to me at a glance, that looks like really old glass, and it looks like some of them are missing at the moment. And that's not an actual dirt map; it's just a procedural, different amount of values. So it's a super powerful tool, and we're gonna see you can use it for a lot of different things. I am trying to think, what next? Another thing that we're going to do in this kit is we're going to go and we're going to look somewhere around here. We got a room with a whole bunch of barrels. So generally speaking, this is kind of my process. I'm actually going to turn one of those GPUs off. This is generally my process whenever I get a new kit, is I kind of pick one view that I think is kind of cool. I start working on materials, and then I'll start panning around a little bit. Excuse me, and try to find just more stuff to look at, and make sure it's kind of looking everywhere. So I have just a very basic HDRI in this scene. Nothing special about it. It's a Guthrie sky, and kind of a standard type of sky that I might use, so that hopefully these materials work moving forward. And sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. You never really know, but let's pull this around just a little bit. And so we haven't looked at the wood at all yet. And what we're going to do for that is basically the same process that we did for everything else, but we have to keep a couple different things in mind. So where is our wood? I think that's it. Alrighty. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to add that same variation in, and we're going to do it again by element. Because for a lot of this stuff, all of these planks are actually modeled, which is wonderfully helpful. That's the wrong one. And so we're going to not do dirt just yet. First, we're going to put in a random color generator. And again, we're going to set it to element ID. And we're going to see black and white everywhere. So that's good. That means we know it's working. And then I'm just going to set that to soft light. Depending on what render engine you're using, again, there are a few different ways to plug this into how you're going to actually combine it with your diffuse texture. But they're all relatively straightforward. So we can see here that now we've got like a bit of variation. I think we can go maybe a little bit darker on this guy. And now we're just going to nest that basically into a dirt map. And if, oops, that's not how I wanted to do that. If I remember correctly, this is going to look good on the doors and the boxes, and it's going to look terrible on the barrels. And that's because as soon as we go and make everything go vertically, and then spread it enough because we want these to be pretty dirty. So if we go with like 24 inches here, this we're starting to get some somewhat realistic dirt, but then because these are concave barrels, they don't look any good. So we're going to ignore them for a moment and just try to get the doors looking and the boxes looking all right. And I think that normal map is way too strong. So we're going to tone that down. We're going to soft it. We're going to round the edges again. And I think what we'll do is we'll actually make this reflective. Not that reflective. Just so that we kind of have that old wood kind of gets that soft, greasy look, which I'd like to have. Now we're kind of getting somewhere. But you can see these barrels just look like garbage now. So we're going to leave these and call those just about good enough. I want it a little bit darker. So there we go. And then for the barrels, all we're going to do is we're just going to use the same material that we've created and just copy a new one. You can name it barrel. And then these guys will apply to just the barrels here. Because I do want to use dirt, but it needs its own setting, that's basically all that is. But we know that the map's going to look good. We know that, you know, everything's going to be in the right place. And we're just going to turn that way down. Okay. And that should do it. And so now we still have some variation going, which I'm actually quite like from the dirt. And it brings out the, whatever the round part is, the hoop, I guess, of the barrel. But we still have all that variation. We can crank that up if we want to. We can adjust that material independently. And so you can do that kind of anywhere. As far as if you want to adjust just one thing for one material, just copy it and make some quick adjustments. Okay, so let's see what we're looking at here. So there you have it. We have some textures. Everything's, you could drop these into any scene and they would start looking good. I think that you're going to start running into some repetition if you are making a giant field of trying to make a giant field of factories and the like. So I think what we'll do at this point is, unless if you guys have any specific questions about any of the textured images you've seen that have popped up, or like the Wild West kit or the Fairy Tale kit or the Slums kit, please let me know and we can pop open any of those kits and take a look at them. But the random colors put throughout and dirt are kind of the two biggest things that I use to vary things. And one of the more, I think I saved it somewhere. For using, like, this is a lot more materials to go through and adjust, but this is in the Slums kit. If you just plug everything in more or less like I just explained, you get something like this. And then if you go through and add dirt and some random variation, you can get a much richer and varied scene, especially for something like Slums or like the industrial kit. You can see you can add random colors to all of the metals. So it really gets that kind of hodgepodge thrown together look. And you get all of this nice dirt from, basically all the overhangs and everything else. And that's using just the exact same things that I did with this kit, just on more materials. Playing with the scale of textures. We can do that, and we can do that in this scene. So there are two ways you can go about doing that. So let's say, and the time I think that you most often need to do that, let's get some kind of camera that makes sense here, is if you decide that, yes, this building's brick right now, but let's say we wanted to make this whole building concrete as opposed to brick. The UV size is going to be different for this. So even though the bricks are consistent all the way throughout the scene, the concrete map is quite a bit bigger than our brick map. So let's apply the concrete onto this material. And it kind of looks like it has these little bricks, but that is not what this, you can use that map this way, you can use it however you like, but it's not how it's designed to look. These are meant to be bigger panels. So you have two options, basically. You don't want to adjust this material scale-wise because it will affect all of the concrete in the scene, and most of anything that was set as concrete initially is going to be right. So the easiest way, or the way that I would go about doing it, let me make sure that this is set up to, yep, would be is that with this object selected, let me show you what I'm looking at. So the material we just changed in 3ds Max, you can put a UVWX form on it, which is basically saying you can tile it, you can rotate it, you can do basically whatever you would do with a normal map or a normal box mapping. And for something like this, we can go way down and go UV, change the tiling down to 0.2, and you can see how much bigger it's gotten, right? So if I turn that back off and you look over here, you can see nice and small. Turning that on, back up to more of like a regular scale for everything. If you don't want to go about that way, or if you want to change it, the scale of the texture everywhere, you can go in and if we grab that concrete texture, you can go in and adjust it actually at the map. They may look a little different depending on which render engine you're using or software you're using, but you can almost always adjust offset and tiling here. And so we could do the same thing by setting, I'm going to pause this for a second. We can change all of these to 0.2. And actually, yeah, it's only 2. And well, now we're doing it twice over, so let's turn that off. And so we're back to that normal sized scale. But the problem with that method is that here, where the UVs were good, now that map is massive. So if you're going to go that route, I would suggest you make a separate map for it. But I do find it to be, because it affects so many things, I think it's better to adjust the actual UVs on the object. The other option you can do is you can just apply a new mapping onto it. So I just put a new box mapping over this entire thing. Box mapping, you know, at least at a distance, usually will work fine. And then I can just adjust the size of the UVW map there. I think those are the major ways you would deal with it, at least. I can't think of any other obvious ways to deal with it. But hopefully one of those 2 methods works for you. That glass is driving me nuts. And that's what I mean by, like, depending on what view you're looking at, you kind of have to adjust things one by one. So I said it's something like that where it looks good but somewhat subtle, and then if I want to do more of it, I will do it in the scene that I'm actually working on. All right, what are we, 40 minutes in? Okay, so instead of just going through and playing with this kit, let's save it. And the thought that I was going to have, unless you guys have any specific questions, I was going to go in and open a scene that I kind of put together to look at it, look at some of the variations you guys can do globally. For the most part, adjusting materials should be pretty straightforward. Just plugging in the maps, and then you can adjust how reflective it is and all that kind of fun stuff. But I think for most of these scenes, especially when you're creating a giant world, what you want to do is, it's really that global variation that's going to sell a scene. And so if we go into the scene that I kind of made, and it's going to take a minute to open because kind of got away from me a little bit there. We have a big scene, and I can show you what it's going to look like. If I can find it. So right now, as the scene sits, it looks like this. And basically nothing's been done besides arranging things that I didn't just show you. So there's some dirt maps in there. Some of the glass has random IDs on it and stuff like that. But you can see as a whole, if we look at any particular part, it's not particularly lifelike. We don't have a lot of variation anywhere. You kind of see the same colors and same amount of reflectivity and shades everywhere. And so I think we can very quickly go in and make that quite a bit more lifelike by applying the same ideas as we were just looking at, but doing it in a slightly different way. Alrighty. So this scene got away from me just a little bit. As I was setting it up, it's a little bit of a mess. I tend to work messy with these things. If you have any questions about anything you see that I'm not explaining, please just let me know, and I should probably look through and make sure I'm not missing anything. No, I think we're doing good. Glass variation, UVs, scale of UVs, perfect. Okay, so for this one, we're going to set it, that's a normal size. And just make sure everything's set up. So again, this is set up basically exactly the same as far as all the materials go. There might be a few more nodes in a couple of them, but nothing drastic. and you can probably see that most of these F-Storm dirt plugged into a mix map. There's a random color on that. But they're all basically the same structure. You have a roughness map plugged into bump reflection and reflection glossiness, and some fall offs maybe. So I did a couple fabrics in this one. But yeah, nothing that different going right now, and it doesn't look bad yet, but I don't think it looks great. So let's see what we can do about that. This is going to take a minute, just because of the size of the scene. While this is loading, I would love to hear what you guys think about seeing everything with textures on it. Are you guys excited about it? Underwhelmed? Overwhelmed? Excited to start playing with it? What are you guys going to do first? Would love to hear your thoughts. The more feedback we get, the more we can keep catering things as directly towards you guys as possible. Because the real goal is to make your image making as easy as possible. If we can take away all of the mundane steps and that kind of thing, we'll be very happy about it. So yeah, fire your thoughts at me. Would love to hear them. This should get going in a second. Uberwhelmed. That's a good one. Happy to hear that, intelligent machine. We've really liked seeing the response to the last few kits that were textured, and that really kind of pushed us to get cracking on all the back kits. So yeah, we're really happy with how you guys have been reacting to it and feedback, and the more images we see, as always, the better. That gets us up in the morning, so to speak. And yeah, I mean, texturing them was a ton of fun. You go through and you kind of think, what's the best texture for each little spot, and what's going to be the most versatile, and what'll work close up for the most part and far away. It was a fun challenge for us, and I'm really excited with how the kits turned out. All right, let's pause this for a second. Let's see. In the material node editor, is there a button where we can sort all the nodes? I'm using 3ds for a while. I'm not sure if there's a button for that. Yes, depending on what you mean by sort. So this is kind of, I think all the materials in the scene. If you go into Slate, and I go back and forth depending on what I'm doing, excuse me, when you go to get all scene materials, it should just bring everything that's being used. Oh, excuse me. Coffee's got me today. It should just show you everything that's being used, and it should lay it out somewhat nicely. You can also go up here and set it to sideways or horizontal, and it'll give it to you that way, but I find that a little bit harder to use since I tend to have this open on my secondary screen, which is vertical. And if you click on this little guy, so if we were to move all this stuff around and you end up with a hodgepodge of stuff all over the place, you can do two things. One is you can just click that, this little layout all vertical, and it'll do it. And if you just have a situation where you have one map and you just want to get all of these maps back to this guy, this little dude here, layout children, will bring everything back and lay it out, depending on how complex of a material it is, somewhat logically. So hopefully that helps you a little bit, Forrest. Okay, so let's go through and just kind of pick a couple of things to adjust for this scene. One, I'm going to make it a little bit brighter. Where's my exposure? Just so we can kind of see what we're looking at. Obviously, the darker a scene is, the more you can get away with. But if we turn this light up to some degree, you should be able to start seeing the scene a little bit more. let's see. So some of the things that are first sticking out to me is right here down at the bottom, all of this brick, and I apologize, this scene kind of renders a little bit slower, such is life. But all of this brick we can see, even when it's all noisy, is all the same color and tone. And so rather than trying to change everything based off of the elements like we were for the glass, we want to change this by object, basically, or by mesh. And so if we go through and find the brick, and right now, all of the brick in the scene is the same. So if we eyedropper that, it should bring us to the brick. I'm just going to pull it out here so we have a little bit of room to work. And you can go as kind of crazy as you want with this. So if you want to do a multicolored world, you could do a multicolored world. I'm not much of a colorful guy, I think, when it comes to that sort of thing. But if we plug this in right off the bat, we should see everything go to shades of gray based off of how it's looking. So we can see, even at a glance, that looks more realistic to me. We're not going to keep it as black and white, even though actually that might be fun. We could do it as a black and white world. We'll keep it somewhat real world. But if we go through and we can add in more colors, and you might need to do 2 mixes if you're using forest color or use a custom gradient. Either one will get it done. But we can add in, and just to kind of exaggerate the effect, let's go with like bright red. You can see now we have black, white, and red buildings. And so if we just tone that down a little bit, we don't even need to tone it down that much. The blacks, we can go into kind of a, we can push it all the way to blue, which will take a red and make it pretty gray. And the white, we can go with like an orange. And then if we go over top of everything, we're just going to start fine-tuning the color. So I set it to soft light. So the darker the color, the darker it's going to make the red. And the brighter it is, it'll lighten it. If it's at 128 in value, it's only going to adjust color. And I'm not quite liking how that's looking. So I'm going to take some of this color out. I think we go brighter. I think brighter is the key. That red's still coming out quite a bit. Where's this black coming from? There we go. That's more of what I was looking for. And so you can see now that we're starting to have variations in the tones. I know that it's quite noisy at the moment, but we're getting a lot of different colors coming in. We can also go in, if we wanted to make just a couple of those buildings white, let's say, we can do the same thing over again. Plug this guy in there. And if you just make the white less likely, you can kind of adjust which ones are white. And I actually kind of like those buildings up on the top. And then we just set that to screen and tone it down a little bit. And we're starting to get some real variation. And it's really just in like a couple of nodes. And the nice thing is that if you scatter buildings, all of this will still work. So you could scatter a city's worth of this stuff. And you're still going to get all of this variation. And you can just keep adding little elements to it to get really as much variation as you want. So that's going to give us some variation there. I think we could use some up here as well. And I think we could also go through these light green kind of old bronze, old copper roofs. Because of how this scene is set up and because of that warm light on it, they're really getting washed out. And so if we want to go through and very quickly change, all of these little domes up here to red, we can do that pretty easily. One thing you can do is just turn off the diffuse map altogether. And that should change to red as soon as it updates. Because we have reflection maps going on, glossy maps going on, and bump maps going on, you're still going to get some texture in that roof. It depends what you're looking for. You could also adjust this map. But if I was making this scene, I would say that that's probably good enough, even if we render this at twice as high of a resolution. And we can go through and apply that material to some of these other little bits and pieces as well, so that we have some more red in this scene. I think what we want to do for up here is I feel like it should be more red and white. So we can very just quickly grab some of these guys. That guy's all connected, so we're not going to use that one. Who knows what happened there? And these little guys. This is another thing that I do all of the time with these kits, which is all these three guys is I wanted something to kind of go up. I didn't want to obviously model it. And so I just took what is a tower and I put a symmetry modifier on it. Which you can also do alternatively if you're not using Max or you don't know how to do symmetry directly. You can just copy something like this and rotate it 180. Boom. Now you have a piece that looks like it belongs going upside down. Got rotated. There you go. I did that a lot in this scene, as you can kind of see everywhere. Turn that back on. And let's see where we're at. Okay, we got some red up there, which I like, except that Big Ben can use some red. And then the other thing we're going to do is this stone material that's up here is super duper gray. And I think we want this as more of that kind of ivory tower look. But I think I only want it up there. And so the way that I'm going to just adjust those is if I select everything in this scene by that material, that has that material in it, and I'm just going to ungroup it once. You can kind of see where the top ones are, and those ones I want to make into the white material. Everything else I want to leave dark. Like I'm okay with these being relatively dark. So all you need to do is grab that material, and we did this 2 weeks ago with Wild West. Grab that material, just copy it over, call it, stone, and we'll call it stone white. And just apply that to that material, to just those pieces. And then we can just quickly adjust this material in a million different ways. Because it's so far away, we probably could get away with it just being white. We could just put a white material on there, or we could go through and actually adjust it. What I think I'm going to do is I'm going to give it like a 220 white, thereabouts. And I'm just going to drop the opacity of the diffuse map. So there's still a little bit there, but it's mostly going to be white at this point. Maybe not quite that much. Let's see. Come on, computer. Computer is not liking something. But that will probably be enough for me. Let's see what it looks like. Looks like we have another material up there too. So I have a question for you guys. We have two options. I can continue making some changes. I can field some questions, or let's see here. Or we can go through a Photoshop file of where this ended up. Let's just apply that there. And let's apply it up here as well. I will pull that image up. So when this was all said and done, when I was kind of running through and assuming that this wasn't going to take as long as it did, this scene ended up looking like this. It was kind of the end result that I got to. So we put some variation basically all over the map. We brightened this up, added in even like these slight little changes in roof color, I think really help sell the realism of these images. You know, you can go really, really heavy and have colors all over the place, but even a little bit will, well, I think go quite a ways as far as making things look cool. And that's actually kind of a cool shot. Oh, I like how that turned out. J Memmy votes for Photoshop session. Forrest Lamb, you're asking for Photoshop file. And then we've covered random color pretty heavily. I know if you guys are using a different, I'm going to save this. I might make this image later. I haven't actually panned around this scene yet. Thank you, Forrest Lamb. The fun thing is that once you go through and set up a big scene like this, there's probably a ton of great cameras in it, but I was literally doing it this morning whilst baby was crying over there. And I'm just now getting to a point that I can pan around a little bit, and I think there's going to be some cool stuff because it's a pretty sweet scene, I think. But you hopefully you guys get the idea. If you guys aren't using F-Storm, which I think a lot of you guys are using Octane and Redshift, they have the same type of tools, and I'm sorry that I don't have them handy as an example to show you guys. But it's a huge help in creating these kind of rich worlds, I think, and believable worlds. And it's a very quick way, because putting in like textured dirt and all that kind of stuff can take a lot of time. And actually, we're going to close that scene because Photoshop's not going to like having it open. Putting in dirt maps that are custom to each object and all that kind of stuff takes a really long time. Throwing in just a bit of variation from object to object, especially in big overarching scenes, gets the same visual effect, especially on a first read, and doesn't actually go through the painful process. Because it's procedural, it's usually just a very quick, 1, 2, 3 in each material, and boom, you're off running. I used it very, very heavily in the Wild West kit that we looked at 2 weeks ago to generate board variation everywhere, right? Because a texture map's only going to do so much globally for something like that. And using either forest color or F-Storm random color or V-Rays multi-text, and just using colors in there, we'll get that done, very, very quickly. Forest Lamb. We are going to see what render passes I usually render out in just 1 second. It really depends. There's a couple that I always render out. And the other ones is very frequently it's a case by case basis. For my professional work, I obviously render out a lot of render passes, so I can customize things as much as possible without having to re-render things. For Drokey stuff, it kind of depends. This image or this scene, as you saw just a moment ago, renders really slowly, and that's without any atmosphere in there. So I knew right from the get-go that I was going to need a depth pass. I always render out at least one depth pass. And that's really the only one I think I used. That and just a really quick object shader. So we can kind of look at this here. Here's my depth pass, goes all the way out to the mountains, more or less. An objects pass, which just renders out the wire color, I believe, the wire color. I never actually take any time to set it up for the most part. If I need a map or a mask, I'll render it out specifically. But I always throw this in because, hey, if I just want to grab something really quickly, usually between an object pass and a material pass, I can grab anything I need from that without actually taking any time setting it up. I did render out a reflections pass, which is super dark in this. I didn't use it, but it's one of those ones that I throw on there a lot. And direct lighting is one that I do use quite a bit. And ever since Jonas DeRoe did his Egypt tutorial, which I was just blown away by that Photoshop file, I've rendered out a normal map. And it's super easy to grab highlights or shadows, depending on which direction you want it to face, if you need to separate some things or paint in some detail or reflected light. I never really thought of using it the way that he uses it, and ever since I've been always rendering it and using it really, really heavily, actually, to be honest. But not in this scene. This scene, I rendered it out right before this stream. This is about maybe 20 minutes in Photoshop, thereabouts. But we'll just quickly kind of go through. Please feel free to ask any questions as they come about. So this was the final image, and we started out super dark. As a general standpoint, I like to protect my highlights. And so I'm okay, especially with not so much with cameras necessarily, but definitely with render engines. You can usually pull out quite a bit of detail from shadows if you're working in 16-bit or 32-bit. And bringing back highlights and with realistic color tends to be really hard. So this was kind of the rough render that I rendered out. Good speaking, Mike. You can see all that little bit of variation kind of everywhere. The roofs have a little bit of variation throughout. These are more or less the same. There's a touch of variation in there. And you can see over here, we have roof color changing. We'll see it better in the final. We did these awnings. The awnings all have a slightly different color in them all the way throughout. The stones all have a slightly different color so that they break up from one to the next. But let's go through on how I did it. Pretty simple. First, I made it brighter, and you can see there's not any ungodly noise in the shadows or anything like that. It was rendered out at 2560. So first things first, brighten it up because obviously that needed to happen. And then just starting to add a little bit of depth with just a very simple curves layer, just lifting the blacks more and more as you go deeper into the scene. I wasn't worried too much about color just yet. And then a little added just to separate that back kind of mountain range with the little factories and stuff all the way down there, is just, that's still the depth mask, which I went through and leveled. And then what's this doing? Oh, darkening the foreground. Again, just trying to separate as much as possible the foreground from the midground to the background. So again, this is just an inverted depth mask and a contrast and darkening S-curve. For the foreground, darkening the sky. There's nothing really too mind-blowing in here. Just adjusting the colors. I felt that the, I'm not sure if this is actually even coming through all the way through to Twitch. But just going through and taking a little bit of the green out, I think helps quite a bit. I think I'm overly sensitive to green. But that might just be me. Not a God ray, but a hint of a God ray, I guess you could call it. Technically speaking, you only get God rays when you look directly towards the sun, or at least vaguely towards the sun. If it's coming from behind you or on your side kind of the camera at all, it's usually really subtle. So I didn't want to make it a hard line God ray, but I did want just a little bit of kind of thing going on. So that lifts that just a little bit here, and this does that again, and it adds a little bit of color into it. And this is a blurred version, set to copy merged, blurred, and then set to screen. And then I've painted just a really simple mask of where I want it and don't want it, and then adjusted the color of it. And you can see that little bit of warmth to me, that's my favorite part of this whole image. As subtle as it is, that layer is my favorite. That's soft light maybe? Yep, just darkening, adding a little bit of contrast to a soft light layer. A little bit of brightness back behind there, which I think makes this read just a little more clearly, and that's probably a little bit overdone. But life will go on. What is this doing? Just giving a little bit of painted glow into these little lights in the shadow. So there's a little bit of interest there. And I'm not sure. That looks like it's more glow. Nope. Oh, that would be a, this is a big Nick color effects adjustment. Both of these are. And Nick color effects, or I guess now it's owned by somebody else, is awesome. You can do a lot in a very short amount of time. So I was actually quite subtle on that. And then last little bit is just my basic finishing. So sharpened, nothing. And then just adding some film grain through Analog Effects Pro. Some film grain, a little bit of dusts and scratches, which I like for, not so much for professional work, but definitely for all of my quick sketches. And that's kind of the full story for all the Photoshop that got done. So I think that's about all I got for you guys. I hope that was somewhat insightful and somewhat helpful as far as how to put together some of these kits and some quick things that get a lot of stuff done, especially when you're dealing with repetitive elements or vast cityscapes. You can get a lot done quickly, I think. These shaders, as you can see, are not that complex. I didn't do much more than add dirt and random variation on top of the maps that you already have. And so every scene now has those maps, which we are super excited about and very relieved to finally have them all done. And they should all be... Neo Tokyo is a little bit different because those texture maps are covering building facades. And if anyone's used those maps already, they are constructed just a little bit differently than the rest of the scenes. But everything else is more or less like this, or pretty close. And hopefully that will keep you guys from wondering too much about where things are. The materials should almost always match up with the map names all the way throughout, so that if they come through strangely or anything like that, it should be a pretty quick fix of getting that figured out. And yeah, I think that's all I got. Thank you guys. I'm glad you liked it. Oop, truck going by. So yeah, that is, I think, gonna do it for today. What are we? A little over an hour, so not too bad. Let's go back to me, I guess. No. I think we can leave it with the image. But yeah, if you guys have any other questions, or if there are any types of as you guys start to play with some of these kits, if you guys start having any questions about how to use them or better ways to get something done, please let us know either in a comment on any of the images on Instagram or Facebook, or directly on the Discord in the community requests forum, so that we can try and address it. Anything we can do to help. If you guys are seeing people do things and you're like, oh, that seems really rad, I wonder how they do it, let us know and we will do our best to address it one way or another. If we can get them to come in and give us a short tutorial, or if we can give one, we'd be happy to do so. But yeah, anything that you guys want or need, just, make us aware of it, and we will try to do our best to address it. But thank you guys all for hanging out and checking out the stream. Fire away, JD. I'm still here. And cannot wait to see what you guys do with all the new textured kits. There's the sale going on where if you buy 2, you get 1 free for all of the kits site-wide. So you can stock up if it's time to stock up. And you should have all received emails to download links for any of the kits that aren't textured. I think a Fairy Tale email went out as well. That's not changed. The textured ones have not changed. But the non-textured ones have all been updated. If you have not gotten a link, please let us know. Hit us up at info@KitBash3d, and we will figure out the situation and get it fixed. But you guys should all have those links. I can't wait to see what you guys do with it. And yeah, let's see. What was the question that JD had? Space Colony is not getting updated or changed. That was kind of the first test run on throwing in textures. Excuse me. We took a look at it. That should be good to go. If you're seeing any issues in the kits or anything like that, please bring it to my attention. But no, Space Colony is staying as is. Fairy Tale, Slums, and Wild West. If you guys got a link with that, they've not updated. They've not been updated in any way. So they kind of those were all of us kind of getting our feet under us for a process for all of those. But if you want to download it again, by all means, the more the merrier. But yeah, guys, as always, thank you so much. Cannot wait to see what you guys make. Just a last little update. Max and Banks, who aren't with us today on the stream, are busy getting ready for the Sleep Tight release, which is on Thursday. It is gonna be awesome. The video game, if you guys haven't checked it out, have a look at it. Super rad game. The art's really cool. It's gonna be awesome. So definitely keep an eye out for that on Thursday. There should be some cool stuff happening. I think they're doing a stream that'll be hosted on this channel, I believe. Don't quote me on that. For some of the launch festivities. And yeah, pick up the game. I've been lucky enough to get to do a little beta testing of it, and it is addictive. So also, if you're going to pick up the game, clear your schedules a little bit. All right, guys, that does it for me. Thank you all so very much. Happy rendering. Can't wait to see what you guys make.